My dad slapped me across the face at his own retirement party, in front of everyone, and no one said a damn thing. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. The night started off beautiful. The banquet hall shimmered with gold and white lights, the kind of place you rent when you want to impress people. My dad, Clifford Quinn, was the man of the hour, the respected construction executive, the local success story. Everyone was there to celebrate him, old co-workers, friends, even a few city officials. I stood by the buffet table, holding a glass of water, trying to stay out of the way. When he took the stage to give his speech, he looked proud, the kind of proud that fills a whole room. He thanked my mom, my brother Dean, and a long list of coworkers. He didn't even mention me. I laughed quietly and joked, "Guess I'm adopted." People nearby chuckled, but my dad's face changed. His smile dropped. He stared right at me, and before I could say another word, he marched over. The sound of his hand hitting my face cut through the music. The room froze. My cheek burned instantly. I looked around, dozens of eyes on me, but no one moved. Not my mom, not Dean, not his friends who'd known me since I was a kid. My dad just said, "You don't embarrass me," and walked back to his table like nothing happened. I stood there, shaking. The pain wasn't just from the slap. It was from the silence that followed. Every person there made a choice to look away. My mom pretended to fix her dress. Dean kept talking to some coworker, like he didn't just see his sister get hit. I realized in that moment I was completely alone in that family. I left before anyone could stop me. Out in the parking lot, the cold air hit harder than the slap. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my car keys twice. I sat in my car and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My cheek was still red, my eyes wet. I wanted to believe someone, anyone, would come out to check on me. No one did. Inside, they probably went back to the party. My dad was too important, too admired, for anyone to question him. I'd seen that my whole life, the way people bowed to him, the way my mom kept quiet, the way Dean copied every move he made. But tonight was different. Something inside me broke, and at the same time, something else woke up. He humiliated me in front of everyone, and they all let him. That slap wasn't just his hand, it was the whole family, the whole room, telling me my place. But I knew right then I wasn't going to stay in it anymore. That was the night I stopped being the quiet daughter. That was the night I decided they were all going to see me, one way or another. I couldn't sleep that night. The sound of the slap kept replaying in my head. Not just the hit, but the quiet that followed. It wasn't new, not really. It was just the loudest version of something I'd been feeling my whole life. Growing up in the Quinn house meant living in my father's shadow. He was the kind of man people admired without really knowing. Clifford Quinn, the name carried weight in town. He built homes, sponsored local events, shook hands with every mayor we ever had. To outsiders, he was the picture of discipline and success. To me, he was a man who loved control more than family. Then there was Dean, my older brother, his mirror image. Dean never had to earn approval. It was handed to him. Every report card, every game, every small win became proof that Dad's methods worked. When Dean talked, people listened. When I did, they smiled politely and went back to him. I used to think maybe if I worked harder or stayed quieter, Dad would see me the same way. But no matter what I did, I was always too much or not enough. I remember being 10 when Dean broke a neighbor's window. I got blamed because I was the careless one. When I tried to explain, Dad said, "A good daughter doesn't argue." I stopped talking after that for days, but no one noticed. I was the ghost in my own home, seen when convenient, blamed when needed. Mom played peacekeeper. She'd whisper, "You know how your father gets," as if that made everything fine. I learned early that speaking up only made things worse. So I started to swallow things, little humiliations that piled up like bricks. Every insult, every time Dean got praised for something I helped him with, every eye roll when I disagreed. That night in the car, after the party, I realized the slap wasn't about the joke. It was years of him reminding me where I stood. Every silenced word, every ignored plea, was wrapped inside that one strike. He just finally did what he'd always done, but in public. And everyone's silence? That was the final confirmation. They didn't freeze out of shock. They froze because it made sense to them. The golden boy stayed untouchable. The ghost stayed quiet. Balance restored. But something inside me shifted. I felt this steady calm I'd never felt before. Not sadness, not fear, just clarity. I saw my family for what they were. People who valued appearances over truth. People who would protect a lie if it kept them comfortable. For years I'd waited for them to apologize, to notice, to care. I finally understood that waiting was useless. The slap ended something. Not just my respect for him, but the illusion that any of them would ever stand beside me. I wasn't the ghost anymore. I was done disappearing to make their world tidy. The slap was his moment of pride. For me, it became the line I'd never cross again. This time, I wasn't going to let it slide. Days after that night, the house felt like a waiting room. I watched hours pass like blank pages and kept expecting someone to fill one with an apology or at least a question. Nothing came. No one knocked. No one texted to ask if I was okay. Their silence landed like another weight. When I finally forced myself to call Mom, she answered on the second. Her voice moved around the subject as if skirting a puddle. "He's under strain," she said, as if that explained everything. She spoke gently, like a person smoothing a wrinkle from a dress, not like a mother worried about her daughter. I searched for tenderness, an admission, any sign she believed me. Her sentences stayed tidy and careful. There was no remorse. Dean's response was different, but no kinder. He was brisk, clinical, more concerned with optics than feeling. "You made a scene," he said. "You embarrassed Dad." He sounded disappointed in me, not appalled at what had happened. He steered the conversation away from the moment itself and onto safer terrain. Plans, logistics, what people were saying about the party. He offered no comfort, no outrage, only frustration that our family reputation might wobble. Hanging up, I felt a strange, cold clarity settle in. The expectation that someone would intervene had been a habit, a small superstition I'd carried since childhood. It had kept me from acting out of self-defense before. Now I recognized the truth. My family chose their illusions over my truth. They prioritized the facade they'd built together rather than address harm at its source. That recognition changed the way my anger behaved. It didn't flare and disappear. It sharpened and focused. Instead of the hot, aimless fury that only leaves ash, mine became strategic. If they would bury their discomfort to protect him, then I would return the favor with interest. I would make sure their complacency had consequences they could not file away with a smile and a speech. I started to think like someone assembling a case. I cataloged moments that had always felt like chips taken from me. Dismissals, public corrections, praise that landed on Dean for work I'd helped with. Each instance was a clue. I wrote them down quietly, not as a purge but as evidence that patterns existed. If their first reaction to harm was to protect their image, I would expose the cracks in that image. My aim was not chaos for its own sake. I wanted precision. I wanted them to understand the experience of being unseen until it suited them, to feel briefly and undeniably the smallness they'd made me feel for years. I wanted to show them that ignoring a wrong is itself a wrong, and that silence can carry culpability. The plan took shape slowly. I thought about where their vulnerabilities lay: financial ties, colleagues who respected appearances more than facts, documents left in unlocked drawers. I considered timing, where a revelation would resonate most, and how to ensure the truth landed where it would force conversation instead of excuses. This resolve felt like staking a claim on my own life. For years I had waited for validation that never came. Now I had moved past hoping. The next steps would be deliberate and careful. Humiliation would be a tool, not a spectacle. I wasn't trying to break people, only to teach them what it meant to be disregarded. They had given me no other choice. Sitting at my kitchen table, I made a list. Each item was a promise to myself. Collect the facts, be merciless with the bureaucracy of truth, refuse to let anyone tidy away what had been done to me. The course ahead would be uncomfortable, and it might leave me colder than I'd imagined. But whatever warmth remained from waiting had gone. In its place stood a resolve as steady and deliberate as a blueprint. I parked in front of the house I grew up in and just sat there for a while. The porch light was on, glowing soft and warm, but the place didn't feel like home anymore. It looked staged, like a photograph pretending to be something real. The walls, the trimmed hedges, even the brass number plate on the door, all of it carried his name, his pride. The house had always been his favorite trophy. When I finally walked up the path, my shoes sounded too loud on the concrete. Mom opened the door before I could knock. She gave me a small smile that didn't reach her eyes and stepped aside. "He's in the den," she whispered, as if warning me about a sleeping dog. I nodded and headed straight for my old room to gather what I came for: some boxes, a few books, pieces of a life that no longer belonged here. Every photo on the hallway wall told the same story. Dad shaking hands, Dean holding a trophy, me standing at the edge of the frame, smiling like I'd been told to. The air smelled faintly of polish and paper, that sterile scent of something kept spotless for show. I heard the sound of pages turning from the den as I passed. He was sitting in his leather chair, glasses perched low, pretending to read the paper. The act was obvious, but I didn't say anything. I was halfway to the door when his voice broke the silence. "You made me look weak," he said without looking up. I stopped in the doorway. His tone was calm, not angry, worse somehow. He spoke like a man discussing a business setback, not what he'd done. I turned toward him. "You did that yourself." The words left my mouth before I even thought about them. They hung in the air, sharp and clear. His eyes finally lifted from the paper. For a second, I saw confusion, maybe disbelief, like he couldn't recognize the voice that came from me. It was the first time I'd ever talked back. The moment stretched thin. I thought he might shout, but he didn't. He just looked away, muttering something about respect and boundaries. Mom appeared behind me, clutching a dish towel in both hands. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, watching, her face pale. I wondered if she was afraid of him or of what I'd just done. Maybe both. I picked up the boxes and walked down the hall. The carpet muffled every step, but my heartbeat filled the quiet anyway. At the end of the corridor, something on his desk caught my eye, a neat stack of folders, each labeled with his company's logo. Retirement portfolio, contracts, financial records. I could see the edges of blueprints poking out from one folder. Curiosity tugged at me. I shouldn't have cared, but I did. Those papers were everything he valued, his legacy, his pride, the thing he'd built his entire life around. I stood there for a moment, staring at the files, and a thought started to form. Not a full idea, just a spark. I slipped my keys into my pocket and turned toward the door. Mom's voice followed softly, almost pleading. Just let it go, Mara. I didn't answer. Letting go was exactly what I was done doing. As I stepped outside, the air hit colder than before. I looked back at the house, its perfect windows, its manicured lawn, and realized it wasn't a home at all. It was a monument to a man who cared more about how things looked than how people felt. And maybe, just maybe, I'd finally found a way to make him see what he'd built wasn't as solid as he thought. I kept the job quiet. Designing small commercial buildings paid the bills and let me think in straight lines, angles, load calculations, tolerances, things that made sense when family life didn't. When I pulled those folders from my father's desk, I expected invoices or old letters. I didn't expect the kind of proof that makes a person reconsider everything they thought they knew about someone. The first page was a subcontractor list. Names I'd seen on site visits were crossed out and replaced with lesser-known company. The invoices showed payments routed through shell accounts. Then I found inspection reports that had been altered, notes erased, warnings removed, dates changed. A stamped approval sat beside handwriting that contradicted it. Someone had smoothed over problems, so the project could move forward faster, cheaper, and with risk tucked into corners no one would notice until it was too late. My hands went cold, but my brain moved into the part of me trained to read drawings, find inconsistency, trace the revision history, follow the thread. The condo tower, luxury units, glass facades, promises of high-end fixtures, was flagged with multiple safety concerns. Structural joints had been redesigned without proper review. Fire-stopping details were missing in crucial sections. Those were not small oversights. They were deliberate omissions that could hurt people. He resigned right as the documents suggested trouble. It looked tidy, almost strategic. Step down, collect the accolades, leave others to handle the mess. That timing settled like a stone in my stomach. It wasn't incompetence or negligence, it was a decision. A choice to walk away while others remained exposed. The moral question came quickly and loudly. Expose him, and risk wrecking more than a reputation, or bury what I'd found and be complicit by omission. I pictured what would happen if I alerted authorities. Investigations, media, clients watching their investments tumble. I pictured the community meetings where neighbors would ask how this happened, where employees would lose jobs if contracts collapsed. I pictured my mother at the center of a storm she never wanted. The weight of those images made my throat tight. But another memory balanced against them. The night in the hall, the hand across my face, the room that chose decorum over defense. My father had used his authority to discipline me in front of strangers, and they had let him. They had prioritized his standing above my safety and dignity. That memory sharpened into resolve. If he could decide who suffered to protect his image, then I could choose to make sure the truth didn't hide behind applause. I read every page twice. I photographed documents, cataloged dates, logged correspondences. My designer instincts turned into methodical record keeping. For weeks I moved like a person assembling a fragile machine, careful, patient, precise. I didn't want a mistake that would let him say I'd misunderstood something, that would let the town shrug and call it family drama. I wanted facts so clear they couldn't be dressed into a different story. At night, when the house was silent, I imagined confronting him with the proof. I imagined his face when the polite masks fell away and the business world he curated showed cracks. I imagined the tables turning, not out of vengeance for its own sake, but to force accountability where silence had been accepted. I knew consequences would ripple beyond him. I knew some people I cared about might be hurt by the fallout. That knowledge made me accountable to myself. My actions would not be blind retribution. They would be deliberate exposure of choices made at the expense of others. The plans I began to shape were precise, built the way I knew how, on paper, with evidence, with intentions laid bare. I called someone I trusted once upon a time, not to boast or to gloat, but because I needed a professional eye on the paper trail. Sam Archer had been a building inspector the year I apprenticed on a municipal job. He knew the codes like a second language and had a habit of asking questions other people avoided. I left him a message with a burner number and arranged a meeting where neither of us would be recognized. When we met in a diner off a side street, I slid a slim folder across the table and watched him flip through the pages. He didn't look up until the white napkin had soaked up 3 wet fingerprints. No theatrics, no grand pronouncements. Just a slow, deliberate reading, like someone confirming a theory out loud. He asked for time to verify, lists to cross-check, names to confirm. I answered in short, careful sentences and told him nothing about me. I wanted him to act on the material, not on the messenger. After he left the folder in his truck and promised he'd handle it, I felt a peculiar mix of relief and something darker. I told myself this was about accountability, that safety mattered more than reputation. But an ember of personal satisfaction glowed under that claim. I had watched men and women smile around him while I left a room. Now, finally, there would be questions aimed at him, not me. Sam's work started quietly at first. He visited sites linked in the files, called former subcontractors I'd highlighted, and requested archived permits from the city office. He spoke in a code I understood, measurements, revision stamps, chain of custody notes. And each new confirmation made my stomach tighten in a way that felt both righteous and hungry. Other people began to notice discrepancies too. Contractors I'd apprenticed with sent nervous texts. Suppliers who once boasted about landing Quinn contracts suddenly offered vague excuses about paperwork. Rumors spread, but not the kind that are shouted at bar counters. These were careful, studious conversations held in conference rooms and foreman trailers. People who once greeted my father with firm handshakes now hesitated in doorways. Meetings were rescheduled. Bids were withdrawn. The company's brightly painted trucks started appearing on sites less often. It was as if the foundation beneath his public face was settling, uneven and noisy. I kept my distance. I didn't return calls from old neighbors who wanted to check in, and I avoided seeing my mother when she tried to meet in places where someone might spot us together. There was a thrill to remaining unseen while others shifted around the consequences. It wasn't cruelty exactly. It felt more like calibration. I had engineered conditions where facts, not family loyalty, would speak. As the pressure mounted, Clifford's allies began doing what defenders do. Spinning, deflecting, pointing to small acts of charity or long-standing relationships as proof of character. But the records were stubborn. Paper doesn't flatter. Stamped dates, signatures, missing inspection notes. They told a version of events that polite conversation could not rewrite. At night, I watched the town respond in micromovements. A banquet reservation was quietly canceled. A plaque in the municipal lobby was repositioned. People who once invited him to ribbon cuttings now left his name out of casual mentions. Those were small humiliations, but they accumulated like sediment, altering the shape of what everyone had taken. I tracked the fallout like someone marking a map. Each withdrawn contract, each hesitant hello, was a small fissure in a carefully constructed image. I didn't gloat in front of anyone. The work felt too surgical for that. Instead, I let the changes unfold and noted them silently, feeling the slow satisfaction of a design finally hitting its marks. What had started as a quiet call in a diner became a movement of evidence meeting consequence. And with every step, I felt less like a wronged daughter and more like the author of an ending he could not stage manage away. The first headline appeared on a Tuesday morning. I saw it by accident while scrolling through a local news site at work. Safety violations under review. Quinn construction project suspended pending investigation. My stomach twisted, not from guilt, but from the strange reality of seeing his name in print for the wrong reasons. By noon, the story spread. Reporters lingered outside the company's office. Phrases like possible falsified record and negligence under retirement leadership began circling. Within days, it stopped being a rumor and became a public scandal. Clifford's longtime partners called emergency meetings, each man trying to distance himself from the one who used to lead the toasts. The same colleagues who'd applauded him at his party now avoided his calls. I imagined him sitting in his leather chair, the same one he'd once read the paper in, only now the articles were about him. Dean wasn't spared either. He had been lined up for a promotion in the same firm, groomed to continue the family's spotless legacy. The announcement was quietly withdrawn. Someone leaked that upper management felt uncomfortable with family optics. I could almost hear his frustration, not over what had happened, but because his perfect trajectory was interrupted. Mom called that night. Her voice was hoarse, as if she'd been crying for hours. "Mara," she said, barely holding herself together, "you're destroying us." There it was us, the family unit that had stayed silent when I was humiliated. The same people who had built their peace on my obedience. I had imagined this moment so many times, her pleading, me standing firm. But when it arrived, it felt heavier than victory. I swallowed hard. "No, Mom," I said, keeping my tone level. You destroyed me first. Her breath caught. I heard muffled sobs, then the dull click of the line disconnecting. For a long moment, the silence afterward felt endless. The anger I'd carried for years spilled out in one violent wave, and with it came something unexpected: exhaustion. I leaned against the kitchen counter, phone still in hand, my heart pounding. I had wanted this exposure, this unraveling. I'd imagined feeling powerful when it finally happened. Instead, I felt like I was watching a building collapse that I had helped design, each floor falling exactly where I'd planned, and still, it hurt to hear the sound. By the weekend, the story grew larger. Local stations dug into old projects, questioning whether other structures met code. Photos of my father shaking hands with city officials replayed on loop with captions about ethical oversight. I didn't need to tell anyone my role. The work spoke for itself, but guilt began to creep in around the edges. I saw my mother's face in every headline. I thought about the workers who might lose jobs, about the chaos that would follow. The line between justice and vengeance blurred until I couldn't tell which side I was standing on anymore. Still, I couldn't stop. The truth was out there now, unstoppable. For the first time, my father was the one people whispered about. His name, once golden, now sounded like a warning. And even as part of me ached for the wreckage I'd caused, another part, the part that remembered that burning slap and the silence that followed, whispered that this was balance, not cruelty. I turned off my phone, sat in the dark, and listened to the quiet hum of my own breathing. Revenge wasn't clean. It never would be. But after a lifetime of being invisible, at least the noise that filled the town wasn't silence anymore. I found him sitting alone in the den again, the same room where he'd once pretended to read while I packed my things. The curtains were drawn halfway, leaving the light to spill in long, uneven lines across the floor. He didn't look up when I entered, though I knew he'd heard me come in. The smell of coffee and dust lingered in the air, but there was something different now, something smaller about the space, as if the walls themselves had stopped believing in him. His suit hung loose on him. The proud posture he'd carried through every meeting, every photograph, was gone. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to fold the newspaper, a paper filled with headlines about investigations, audits, and missing permits. His empire was unraveling in plain sight. When he finally looked at me, I saw something I'd never seen before: fear. Not the kind that comes from being caught, but the kind that comes from realizing control is slipping away. The man who once filled rooms with his voice now struggled to find words. "You've ruined my life," he said, his tone thin, almost pleading. "Do you have any idea what you've done to this family?" For a moment, I studied him in silence. His eyes were dull, surrounded by lines I'd never noticed before. This wasn't the man who slapped me in front of a crowd. That man had been untouchable, inflated by pride. The one in front of me was smaller, reduced to the bones of his own mistakes. I stepped closer until we were at the same level, his chair sinking slightly under his weight. "You did that," I said quietly, "when you hit your daughter and everyone applauded your silence." He flinched like the words struck harder than any slap ever could. His mouth open, ready to defend himself out of habit, but nothing came. The practice speeches, the excuses about pressure and pride, all failed him. There was nothing left to protect. The quiet stretched between us. Outside, the faint sound of traffic drifted through the window. I wondered if he could hear the same echoes I did, the fading applause, the gossip, the hollow promises of people who'd once stood beside him. "I built everything for you," he muttered finally, almost to himself. "For this family." I shook my head. "No, you built it for your reflection." He didn't argue. He just stared at the carpet, the lines on his face deepening, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. I had imagined this confrontation 1,000 times, thinking I'd feel powerful when it came. But standing there, I only felt tired. I realized that revenge doesn't end in victory. It ends in silence. I turned toward the door. Behind me, the sound of his breathing filled the room, slow and uneven. He didn't call after me. He didn't apologize. The last word between us hung heavy, final, and enough. Outside, the air was bright and sharp. The half-finished condo tower loomed in the distance, the same project that had started everything. Its skeleton of steel and glass caught the evening light, glowing orange as the sun sank behind. I stood there for a long time, watching the beams throw long shadows over the street. It was strange, seeing that building still standing, proof that even flawed foundations can hold for a while before they give way. Behind me, the house creaked, old with settling into itself. Ahead, the tower shimmered like a warning. I walked toward my car without looking back. The man who had once seemed impossible to confront now felt like just another casualty of his own arrogance, a figure collapsing under the weight of lies he'd spent a lifetime building. For the first time, he didn't look larger than life. He looked exactly his size. The news moved slower now, reduced to brief updates and closing statements. The investigation wrapped with penalties, suspensions, and words like negligence stamped into the record. Clifford Quinn's name, once used to open doors, now appeared in court summaries and legal filings. The empire he'd built from concrete and pride dissolved into fees, settlements, and whispered pity. He sold the house first. The grand two-story place that had hosted every holiday and milestone became another property listing, its polished floors and crown molding hiding 1,000 arguments. The proceeds vanished quickly, attorneys, accountants, consultants, each one pulling a share until there was nothing left but debts and a retirement fund stripped to the bone. Dean left next. No public announcement, no farewell dinner. I heard from a neighbor that he'd taken a position out west, starting over with a new company under a different division. The golden sun running from the tarnish of his own last name. The family crest that once stood for respect now invited distance. Everyone wanted out before the dust settled. Mom filed for divorce quietly. No drama, no shouting matches. One day her wedding ring was gone, and a month later, her name appeared alone on a rental lease near the coast. I visited her once. She looked smaller, but lighter too. We didn't talk about him. We didn't talk much at all. The silence between us felt different now. Not protective, not fearful, just empty space neither of us could fill. When the final judgments came, I read them without emotion. The numbers didn't matter, the message did. The man who measured worth in projects and reputation now lived under a name people spoke only in hushed tone. The Quinn name had burned down to ash, and I was the one who lit the match. At first, I waited for satisfaction to come, the kind that feels like justice fulfilled. Instead, there was a quiet ache, a hollowness that settled behind my rib. I had wanted him exposed, stripped of the illusion that he was untouchable. I got that, but the victory felt weightless, as if the more I took apart his world, the less I recognized myself. Sometimes guilt crept in, quiet but insistent. Faces from the company haunted my thoughts. Secretaries, site workers, people who'd built their livelihoods under his name. They hadn't hit me. They hadn't chosen silence that night. But they were paying pieces of the price too. Still, every time doubt began to soften me, I remembered standing in that hall, the sting on my cheek, the stillness of people who refused to move. That memory steadied me. I wasn't proud, but I wasn't sorry either. The balance I had sought wasn't clean or moral. It was necessary. The perfect family he displayed had been a performance, and I had simply ended the show. When I passed strangers whispering about the Quinn scandal, I no longer flinched. Let them talk. Every story needs a villain, and I could live with that. Being feared, misunderstood, even hated felt lighter than being invisible. For the first time in my life, I walked through the world unhidden, carrying a name scorched beyond repair but entirely mine. The site looked different now. Fences lined the perimeter, new signs marked fresh ownership, and the half-finished tower that once carried his name was being rebuilt under a new banner. The air smelled of wet cement and sawdust, that clean scent of beginnings. Machines hummed steadily, workers moved with purpose, and the structure itself, its bones now reinforced, seemed to breathe again. I stood outside the gate, hard hat tucked under my arm, watching for a long time before stepping forward. The guard recognized my badge from the new firm and waved me through. Inside, the noise swallowed my thoughts until only the rhythm of progress remained. The walls that once represented deceit were now stripped bare, replaced by steel that gleamed under sunlight. Each beam stood straighter than I remembered. I reached out and touched a section of concrete that had just cured, its surface rough but steady under my palm. The chill of it traveled through my fingertips, grounding me. The last time I'd stood here, this place was a monument to someone else's pride. Now it was something different, neutral, unfinished, alive. The ruin had become a framework for renewal, and for the first time in a long while, the future didn't look borrowed. In my bag were the plans for a smaller project, one that bore only my name. A community center in a neglected part of town, simple, sturdy, built for people rather than prestige. I'd spent months designing it, tracing every line myself, no shortcuts, no borrowed influence. The drawings smelled faintly of graphite and paper when I unfolded them to check a note. Seeing them there made my pulse steady. I thought of my father then, not as a ghost but as a fact, someone who'd taught me exactly what not to become. His name no longer carried weight here. It had been scraped off blueprints, erased from signage, forgotten by everyone except the few who'd learned what it meant. Somewhere he existed in a smaller space, maybe reading old papers, maybe wondering when the world stopped listening. I didn't wish him harm. I just didn't wish him anything at all. Mom was living quietly near the water. Dean hadn't called in months. Our family existed like fragments scattered across a map, no longer a unit, just separate people shaped by the same collapse. The thought didn't hurt anymore. Some things fall apart so they can stop haunting you. I watched the workers raise another beam, the metal catching the late afternoon light. It shone like the edge of something sharp and clean. I realized I didn't need forgiveness to move forward, not from them, not from myself. The act of building, slow, deliberate, unpretentious, was enough. As the sun dipped lower, the tower's shadow stretched across the ground, long and thin, touching the edge of my boots. I let my hand rest on the wall one last time before turning away. The concrete felt solid, trustworthy in a way people rarely were. The slap that had once cracked something inside me had also opened space for this moment, for creation, for ownership, for peace that didn't rely on anyone's permission. The skyline behind me was unfinished, but so was I, and maybe that was the point. I walked toward my car with the rolled-up blueprints under my arm, the sound of hammers echoing behind me, each strike a small reminder that even from ruins, something honest can rise. Do you think I made the right choice by walking away from my family, or should I have tried to forgive them? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like mine.